war. So let's bring in retired four-star General Jack Keane, former Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, and now chairman of the Institute for the Study of War and Fox News senior strategic analyst. General, great to have you with us this afternoon. Your thoughts on these big developments today, sir?
Well, certainly it is that. It's a very good first step in what's going to be a very complicated process. But certainly, President Zelenskyy certainly changed his position. He wanted to have security guarantees prior to a ceasefire. I scratch my head to this day why he was litigating and arguing those points in front of an international and American press with the president. It should have been done prior to the meeting when the opportunity was there without the press present. But this step now certainly puts the ball in Putin's court. And I know there's been some skepticism on the Trump team in terms of whether Putin is really serious. Now, he told the president, he's willing to negotiate. And the president took him at his word, certainly, and he sent his negotiating team in there. This is the third meeting now, or the second meeting. We've had two meetings with Russia, one meeting with Ukraine. And I think what will happen here is we're going to see some of Putin's true colors. Is he going to go to a ceasefire or not? And Zelenskyy is right. Every ceasefire he has been involved in, the ISW and Institute for the Study of War, has tracked it. He's broken it. But is he going to start the process? And that'll be a telltale sign in terms of what's happening here. And we just don't know if he's really serious. We do know this, Martha. He's got a lot of hardline proposals on the table that certainly aren't acceptable to Ukraine. No peacekeepers on the ground, demilitarize the Ukraine.
Yep. Let me just jump in for 1 second, General, because President Trump's talking about Ukraine right now, and then we're going to come right back to you.
And hopefully we'll be able to wipe out a deal. But I think the ceasefire is very important. If we can get Russia to do it, that'll be great. If we can't, we just keep going on and people are going to get killed, lots of people.
Is Zelenskyy invited back to the White House?
Sure, absolutely.
Mr. President, you mentioned the ups and downs in the stock market. You said it'll go up, it'll go down. But do you and your tariff policies right now bear any responsibility for the turmoil we're seeing this week?
Biden gave us a horrible economy. He gave us horrible inflation. And I think the market was going to go very, very bad. If anything, I have a lot of very smart people, friends of mine, and great businessmen.
All right, he's moved on to the economy, but you heard what he said there, General, about Russia. He also said that he would welcome Zelenskyy back to the White House now that this deal appears to be coming together on our side.
Yeah, well, that's going to happen, and Zelenskyy will sign the mineral deal for sure. What the president didn't say in the press conference, but what he has said before, if Putin doesn't want to negotiate, he's not going to go to a ceasefire, then what is President Trump going to do? I mean, he's likely going to slap some pretty tough sanctions on him, possibly oil and gas, which really haven't been done by the United States and the Europeans because they were concerned about pricing, but also go after the central banks. And the other thing I think will be on the table, Martha, is upgunning Ukraine. In other words, giving them actually more capability than what they have right now and removing any remnants of Biden's restrictive policy on the use of long-range weapons. Trump will absolutely, in my judgment, attempt to motivate Putin to go to the negotiating table by the use of some of those options and maybe some others. His staff is certainly capable of coming up with a list of things to push Putin in the right direction. I think that'll be tried before President Trump walks away and says Putin's not negotiating and the war is still going to go on.
Yeah. President Trump has said that he has some very powerful levels in terms of the finance and banking access in terms of Russia's assets, and that could be a possibility here. I want to put up some maps. Russia currently occupies 20% of Ukraine. So one of the big questions is, and at one point before the blow up that Friday afternoon in the Oval Office, President Trump said that he thought, well, maybe we could get some of the land back for Ukraine. What we're showing here on the screen is 20% of the United States. Look at all those states. Obviously, a big difference in size between Ukraine and the U.S., but 20% of Russia, 20% of Ukraine taken by Russia. Do you think there's still a possibility that they could retain some of the land that has been occupied?
Yeah, I absolutely do. And there's been discussions with President Trump over a matter of weeks on that very subject. I mean, he is absolutely entertaining that thought process. And for those who think Russia is almighty here and the Ukrainians really don't have a chance against them, just think of a couple of points. That map you're looking at is an ISW map, and that hasn't changed in 18 months. There's been some tactical marginal gains that the Russians have made, but losing 30,000 troops a month doing it and 100 to 150 tanks a month over the last year. Also, Ukraine is sitting on Russian territory. They're occupying it. That has not happened, Martha, since World War II. They have been on that territory for 7 months, and the Russians cannot get them out of there. They have tried and tried and tried. So Russia has a handful of problems, and certainly they have huge information campaign, false narrative about how mighty they are and how they're going to overwhelm Ukraine. And that is just not happening. And if the United States is willing to support them, it's not going to happen. So there's a lot of incentive for Putin to come to the negotiating table.
Yeah, even back during the Cold War, afterwards, it turned out they didn't have some of the power that they claimed to have during then. General Jack Keane, thank you so much.